What's going on, guys? My name is Matt and I am back with a new PC build. This time the price point is $1,000, and for that price you're getting a powerful system with all new parts. This video is going to be a full build guide. I'm not only going to show you each of the parts and why I picked them, but I'm also going to be showing you how to put everything together step by step, and then finally I'm going to be showing you both gaming and streaming benchmarks because this $1,000 PC is pretty darn good at streaming. Well, there are obviously tons of different ways you could have spent this budget. I went with parts that I know are high quality, that'll work well together and will last you a long time. Now before we go any further, I want to take a minute to talk about the sponsor of today's video, Luster. I don't know about you guys, but when I buy stuff online, I spend hours sifting through reviews to make sure I get the best product possible. Amazon is filled with fake and paid reviews, so trying to figure out what actually to buy can feel like a monumental task, but with today's sponsor, Luster, you're able to take all the guesswork out of this process. Luster is a free browser extension that automatically finds the best product for your budget. It does all the research for you by analyzing tons of legit, verifiable reviews from sources you already trust, like major tech publications, YouTube videos like mine, and Reddit. This all ensures you're easily finding the best product at the best price. They even compare prices across sites and let you know if there's a sale. Head to the link in the description to learn more about Luster and to add the extension. I highly recommend it, and adding the extension is a 100% free way to support the channel. Thanks again to Luster for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to your regularly scheduled content. So the first thing to talk about is the CPU, as other than the graphics card, this has the biggest impact on gaming performance and determines a number of other factors with the build. Right now, if you're building a mid-range PC, the absolute best choice is the new Intel Core i5 12400 and 12400F. I went with the 12400 because it was the same price when I was parting this out, but going with the 12400F to save 20 bucks isn't a bad idea, as the only thing you're giving up is the integrated graphics. This 12400 doesn't have any of the fancy efficiency cores like higher end 12th gen models, but what it does have is 6 performance cores with 12 threads. This CPU has clock speeds of up to 4.4 GHz and impressive IPC. The 12400 beats out every other offering in its price range. Not only is this chip good for gaming, but all of this multi-threaded power means stuff like video editing and streaming are also done with ease. One other nice thing about the 12400 is the fact it comes with Intel's new and improved stock cooler. Gone are the days of those tiny all-aluminum Intel coolers. This new cooler is surprisingly solid and heavy, and it blows the old i5 stock cooler and the current gen Wraith Stealth cooler out of the water. It has an interesting black aluminum fin design and a big copper slug where the CPU interfaces with the cooler. This is great to see. It makes me wonder how AMD will strike back with their new stock cooler, and you'll be able to see temps in the benchmark section of the video. Moving on to the motherboard, this is an area where you will have to pay more when compared to AMD. To get a decent board to pair with the CPU, you're gonna have to pay a bit over 100 bucks. What I went with is this Asus Prime B660 Plus D4. At $140, I think this offers some of the best value for a 12th gen motherboard. This is a full-size ATX board with 4 DIMM slots, 3 M.2 slots, plenty of PCIe expansion, and the list goes on. The back panel I/O is decent, and overall I think this looks really nice. This has pretty much every feature you could want for a board going into a gaming PC, with other nice things like a front panel USB-C header, which is great to see. All in all, while this is more than I would have liked to spend on the board in a $1,000 PC, I think it worked great and did end up fitting into the budget. The next thing to talk about is RAM. While many 12th gen boards only accept expensive DDR4 memory, the D4 in the name means this uses the much more affordable DDR4 memory. After looking at a bunch of different options, I ended up picking a 2x8GB kit of this G.Skill Ripjaws memory for right around $65. This kit is dual channel with rated speeds of 3600 MHz and it's CL18. There's nothing fancy about this kit, but it's cheap, performs well, and is a great value in my opinion. 16GB is plenty for a gaming system and is even enough for streaming and 1080p video editing. What's nice is that because this is a 2-stick kit, it means there will be 2 more open slots on the motherboard, making a future upgrade to 32GB as easy as popping in 2 more 8GB sticks. Next, let's talk about storage. Sure, this system can support 4th gen NVMe drives, but at this budget, those were too expensive to get in this build. After some deliberation and searching, I ended up going for this 500GB Samsung 980 3080. This is an NVMe SSD in the ultra compact M.2 form factor. This is decently fast with advertised read speeds of up to 3500 megabytes per second. This is considered a solid budget drive and it doesn't break the bank, as I was able to pick this guy up for $55. 500 gigabytes is more than enough for your OS, applications, and a modest sized games library. Installation only takes a minute or two because again it's an M.2 drive. One other nice thing is you have multiple other M.2 slots, so upgrading storage in the future can come in the form of another NVMe drive, a SATA SSD, or even a large mechanical drive for tons of storage on the cheap. Now it's time to talk about the graphics card. Yes, the system is actually using a new card that is in stock and that can fit into the budget. After analyzing the price to performance ratio on a bunch of different cards, I ended up going for an AMD Radeon RX 6600. You can consistently get these guys for $450 on Newegg, and performance wise they're pretty darn good. The 6600 can crush any game at 1080p and most games at 1440p. While I recommend just buying the cheapest 6600 you can find, I do want to take a minute to talk about this specific card I got, which is the ASRock Challenger model. This offers two large fans, and compared to the PCB, the heatsink is massive. Also, you'll be able to see temps in the benchmark section of the video. My final note on this card is that I like the color scheme a lot, as it's pretty neutral and should work in pretty much any build. Obviously, if the market was normal, this wouldn't be an amazing value, but given the current market, the 6600 is offering the best price to performance. Moving on to the power supply, I went for the tried and trusted EVGA 650BQ. Now I will be leaving links to this unit along with the 600 and 700 watt versions, as different ones go on sale at different times, and at the time of writing this, the 700 watt version is actually cheaper than the 650 watt version at only $45. As the name implies, this is a 650 watt 80 plus bronze unit from EVGA. EVGA is a reputable manufacturer and my go-to power supply brand. This uses a semi-modular design and offers plenty of power headroom for future upgrades. Finally, let's talk about the case, which is the DIY PC S3BK ARGB. At the $50 price that I paid for this, it's offering an insane amount of value. It has a tempered glass side panel, power supply basement, 3 included RGB fans with a built-in controller, a mesh front panel, and the list goes on. Building in this case was surprisingly easy, and again, for only $50, it's a steal in my opinion. All in all, for $1,000, this is offering some pretty good specs, and this is the best value I've seen in a PC build in many months. Obviously, there are tons of different ways you could have spent this budget, so if you would have made part choices that were different, then let me know what you would have went with in the comment section below. So now that you have a good understanding of all the parts and why I picked them, I'm now going to show you how to put everything together step by step. This system is pretty easy to build, and I'll be guiding you through every aspect, so this should be very doable for first time builders. All you really need is an open area to work in, a Phillips head screwdriver, a smaller Phillips head screwdriver for the M.2 screw, and something to tighten down the standoffs like a nut driver or a pair of pliers. So with your schedule cleared, your workstation open, and your tools in hand, it's now time to start building your PC. The first thing you want to get out is your motherboard box. Open up the box and grab out the board itself, the I/O shield that looks like this. Once out, you can take the board out of the bag and place it on top of the box. Now go ahead and get out your CPU and bring your attention to the center of the board. With your CPU ready, press down and out on this metal retention arm, then hinge it all the way out like this. Now lift up the other part like this. Take your CPU and line the cutouts in the top and the bottom of the CPU with the bump outs on the socket. I'll add an extra visual here, as this is completely different from how Intel's done it in the past. Once lined up, lower it down, applying no pressure. Once it's seated correctly, hinge down this part right here. Now you need to hinge the socket arm back down, but as you're doing this, hold down the other piece like this. This does take more force than you might expect, and the cover will pop off, which is normal. Make sure to save this cover, as you'll want it if you ever need to RMA your board or sell it in the future. With that done, get out your stock cooler. If you flip it over, you can see there's thermal paste pre-applied. Make sure not to touch this, as contaminants could hurt cooling performance. Now take your cooler with the fan cable oriented in this direction and line the pegs on the cooler with the holes in the motherboard. Once down, press in one of the pegs like this, then do the opposite one, and then do the other two. Once all the pegs are in, grab the CPU fan cable and bring your attention to right here, which is where the CPU fan header is located. Bring the fan cable to the gray header that is more towards the top of the board. Line up the notch in the connector with the bump out on the header. Once lined up, just press it in place. Here's another angle of plugging it in case the first wasn't clear. Once that's done, you can take the fan cable and just tuck tuck it down like this to keep it out of the way and to keep the build looking clean. With that done, you've successfully installed your CPU and cooler, and now you can bring your attention to the RAM slots to the right of the cooler. We'll be installing our sticks into slots 2 and 4, which are the gray ones. Start by opening the clips on both of the slots. Take your first stick and line the notch in the stick with the notch in the slot and lower it down. Once you're sure it's incorrectly, press down on both ends until it's fully seated and the clip snaps shut. Now all you have to do is repeat that same process for the second stick, and once that's done, it means you've successfully installed your RAM, and we can take our attention to the top M.2 slot. Take your smaller screwdriver and loosen the 2 screws and lift them away. Now take your SSD and line the notch in it with the notch in the slot and insert it at an angle. You can now hinge it down and then lower the heatsink down, but make sure the plastic on the heatsink is removed. With the heatsink back on, you can tighten down the 2 screws securing it in place. With that done, you can move your motherboard to the side and open up your case box. One tip is to lift the box away from the case and not the case away from the box. Once your case is out, you can remove the top and bottom thumb screws from the back panel, then pull back and lift away this panel. Now you can go ahead and untie and remove this little bag that contains all the screws necessary for building your PC. Once this is done, you can flip the case onto its side, remove the 4 thumb screws, and lift the glass panel away. Both of these panels can be put into the case box, as this will keep them protected and out of the way. Now grab out 3 standoffs from the screw bag that look like this. We're going to be installing these into the 3 holes here, here, and here. I like to hand start mine, and you may be able to tighten them all the way down by hand, but I recommend using a pair of pliers or a nut driver to make sure they're tightened all the way down. I forgot to record this, but you now want to remove the PCIe cover slots 2 and 3 by just bending them back and forth until they snap off. Now you can grab the IO shield you removed from the motherboard box earlier, orient it like this, and lower it down to the IO cutout. Once lined up, press each corner in one at a time until they snap in and the IO shield is secure. You can now grab your motherboard, handling it by the cooler, and lower it down at an angle like this, hinging it down and making sure the IO lines up with the IO shield, and you can see the standoffs beneath the motherboard holes. Now grab out 9 motherboard screws that look like this from the screw bag, take them and install one into each of the motherboard holes with a standoff beneath it. With that done, you can flip the case so the back cable management area is facing up and remove these 4 screws. Then lift the drive cage away. This can be reinstalled later, but we need it out to install the power supply. You can now put the case back onto its feet and grab out your power supply. The only cable we need to add to it is one SATA cable that looks like this. You just take the connector and plug it into one of the 3 SATA ports on the PSU by lining up the clip and pressing it into place like this. With that done, you can take your power supply with the fan facing down and insert it into the back of the case like this, lining up the holes on the PSU with the holes on the case. Now take 4 screws that look like this and install one into each of the holes on the back of the case. You should have ones that look like these that came in your screw bag and a set that came in your power supply box. Either one will work fine. With that done, we can now start routing cables. Start by taking the 8-pin CPU cable that looks like this and says CPU on it and push it through this hole here. You can now take the big 24-pin cable that looks like this and push it through this hole here. You can now take the blue USB 3 cable that looks like this and push it through either the same one as the 24-pin or the one below it. I pushed it through the same as the 24-pin. You can now take the little connector that looks like this and that says USB on it and push it through this hole here. Now take the one that looks the same but says HD audio on it and push it through this hole here. Now take the PCIe power cable that looks like this and push it through this hole here. And the final thing to route is the set of tiny front panel connectors, which you push through the same hole as the PCIe power connector. Now you can take the SATA power cable from your power supply and bring it to the controller here. Make sure it's oriented like this, line it up, and then press it into place. We can now flip the case onto its side and start plugging everything else in. Start by bringing your attention to the top left of the motherboard and by grabbing your CPU power cable and plug it into the CPU power header by lining the clip on the connector with the bump out on the header and press it into place. With that done, we can move to the right side of the case where we'll plug in the 24-pin and USB 3. Start by taking the 24-pin, making sure it's pressed together, line up the clip on the connector with the bump out on the header and press it into place. For USB 3, just take the connector and line the bump out on it with the cutout on the header and press it into place. We can now move our attention to the bottom of the board starting at the left side. Take the HD audio cable and bring it to the HD audio header on the motherboard. With the HD audio text facing up, line it up and press it into place. Now take the USB 2 cable and plug it into one of the 2 open headers with the USB text facing down. Now we can plug in the pesky front panel connectors, start with the power LED ones and plug them into the top left 2 pins with the positive green one to the left. Now take the hard drive LED connector and plug it in directly below the power LED, again with the positive to the left. Next take the power switch connector and press it in directly to the right of the power LED. With all those cables plugged in, it means it's time to install our graphics card. At the back of the case, flip down this little cover. Now go ahead and open up the PCIe lock on the top slot of the motherboard and bring the card to the slot lining the cutout in it with the cutout on the slot. Once lined up, just press it into place, making sure the PCIe lock snaps shut. With that done, you can take 2 of the same type of screws we use for the power supply and install them at the back like this to secure the GPU in place. Now just flip the cover back up like this. The final thing to plug in is the graphics card power cable. This installs just like the other power cables by lining up the clip, lowering it down, and then pressing it into place. With that done, all of your hardware is successfully installed, but there is one thing to do before reinstalling the panels, which is cable management. Basically, just pull all the excess cabling to the back of the case and try and make things as flat and neat as possible. The case came with zip ties, which you can make use of if you want on the various tie down points. Just make sure the cables are flat and the main chamber looks good, as this is what you're going to be seeing. Once you're happy with it, go ahead and reinstall the back panel. Now, one cable management suggestion is to zip tie this dangly piece on the GPU power cable to clean things up a bit. Now with the case on its side, place the glass on top upside down. Now remove the plastic, trying your best not to smudge the panel. Now you can flip it over into place, only handling it by the edges. Finally, remove the other plastic cover, reinstall the thumb screws, and you have successfully built your PC. Now the physical aspect of building the PC is done, but there are still a number of things you need to do before you're able to start downloading and installing games, and the first is to install Windows. I'm not going to show you how to install Windows in this video, but I'll leave a guide on how to do it in the description below. It's super simple to do and doesn't take much time at all. Once Windows is installed, you'll need to install drivers. For the graphics drivers, just head to the link in the description, select graphics, 6000 series, 6600 series, RX 6600, then hit submit and download the latest drivers under Windows 10. Once downloaded, open it up, select yes, this will pop up, select install, let it do its thing, then this will pop up, just hit install and it'll go through and install the graphics drivers. Once done, you can select if you want AMD to collect information on you, then hit restart. You don't really need any of the motherboard drivers, as Windows is pretty good at finding adequate ones for you, but if you want, you can install any or all of the drivers listed on the motherboard support tab under drivers and tools. I decided to download the chipset drivers. Just hit download, extract the contents of the zip folder, open up Asus Setup, go through the prompts, then hit finish. If everything seems good, you can shut your PC off. Now turn it on, but as soon as you press the power button, start repeatedly hitting the delete key until you enter into the BIOS. To the left of this screen, you'll see a setting called XMP. Change it from disabled to profile 1. Then to save and exit, either hit F10 or select this save and exit button down here. Confirm the changes and the system will restart. At this point, you're now ready to start downloading and enjoying some games. Speaking of games, I think it's now time to talk about gaming performance, streaming performance, and temps. In terms of games, I tried to test a wide variety, but if there's one you think I missed, let me know in the comments below. Starting things off with Rainbow Six Siege, I tested this game at 1080p, very high settings using the built-in benchmark. Doing this resulted in an impressive 346 FPS average with 1% lows of 245. This is very good performance, and a system like this is more than enough for competitive play. Next up is Borderlands 3, a AAA title that is somewhat difficult to run. I tested this at 1080p high settings using the built-in benchmark. Doing this resulted in an 87 FPS average with 1% lows of 58. Again, I think this is pretty good performance for the price of this system. Next up is Valorant. I tested this in a deathmatch at 1080p low settings. Doing this resulted in a 374 FPS average with 1% lows of 194. For esports games like Valorant and CSGO, this system again provides more than enough performance for competitive play. Next up is Far Cry 6. I tested this game at 1080p high using the built-in benchmark, and doing this resulted in a 117 FPS average with 1% lows at 84. Next up is the ever-popular Fortnite. I tested this at 1080p pro settings in a Team Rumbles match, which is kind of a worst-case scenario. Doing this resulted in a very good 203 FPS average, but a not-so-good 1% lows at 31. It seems like Fortnite is is a bit stuttery on any system I play it on, even this $1,000 PC. Next up is the hardest to run game in the suite, Cyberpunk 2077. I tested this at 1080p high, driving fast around the city. Doing this resulted in a 67 FPS average with 1% lows of 55. It's great to see the system playing Cyberpunk at high settings with an average above 60. Next is Hitman 3, which I tested at 1080p high using the built-in benchmark. Doing this resulted in a 155 FPS average with 1% lows of 99. The final thing tested was 3D Mark Time Spy, which running this resulted in a CPU score of 9608, a graphics score of 8218, and an overall score of 9608. All in all, I think gaming performance is good, but I also wanted to test streaming. I tested streaming both Valorant and Borderlands 3 to Twitch with a 1080p 60fps output. I locked the FPS at 144 for Valorant, and in Borderlands 3 I locked it at 60. Doing this resulted in a great experience on both the stream end and on my end. In terms of temps, the GPU seemed to stay in the mid-50s to mid-60s most of the time, and the CPU in the low 60s to mid-70s most of the time. All in all, performance, looks, and value on the system are great in my opinion, but I'm interested to hear what you guys think of it. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and if you would have changed anything parts-wise. So yeah guys, I think it may be time to wrap this video up. Make sure to check out Luster linked below and add the extension to save time, money, and to support the channel. These guides are a lot of work, but if you keep watching them, I'll keep making them. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.